Okay. Okay. We're live. We're live, everyone. Welcome to the Lit Lounge, everybody. For folks in the room, for folks in the future on YouTube, thank you so much for being here with us. My name is Jodi-Ann Burey. I'm a speaker, I'm a writer. I work at the intersections of race, culture, and health equity. I've also created the Lit Lounge, which you are here right now in partnership with oneKIN, which is a mission-driven retail tech company that builds solutions to help small businesses and creators. And so you can find the book that we're talking about today, The Laughter by Sonora Jha, and the entire curated book list on their website at shoponekin.co. And so I just want to make sure that y'all know that oneKIN is like not just a book partner, but a core partner in the co-creation of Lit Lounge. One of their founders, Jennifer Gomez, she does not know that I'm doing this, but she is in the background doing her background thing right now on the live, just, helping and supporting us. And so I'm super grateful for her and for oneKIN. She's one of the co-founders. They really care deeply about community, culture, and storytelling. And so I'm really excited for the partnership that we have. And so without further ado, I am so excited to be in conversation with my dear friend, author Sonora Jha, about her novel, The Laughter. Thank you so much, Sonora, for being here, and welcome to Lit Lounge.
Thank you. Thank you, Lit Lounge. And thank you, Jodi-Ann. This is super exciting. We've had so many conversations and, we can keep it a little cleaner than some of the conversations we've had around the book. So, but I am happy and excited to have an official conversation with you.
Yes, and by official and by clean, I just want people to know that I personally do not believe in spoilers, but I have promised Sonora that I will not spoil anything in the book. For folks who haven't read it yet, this is what I would call a thriller, right? And so there's just large portions of the plot that we will not discuss, so I can keep myself accountable to not spoiling it. And so we'll have a good, clean fight, a good, clean conversation about The Laughter.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start. Could you tell us a bit about the book?
Yeah, so as you said, it's a thriller. So I didn't start out writing it as a thriller, but yes, there's a thriller element to it. So it's a literary thriller. It's literary fiction. It's told through the voice, the first person narrative of a white male English professor, cishet guy named Oliver Harding. And he's a middle-aged English professor, tenured and all of that. And he is telling us about this incident that's taken place on campus. And it involves him and his object of obsession, his law professor colleague named Ruhaba Khan, whom she's a hijabi Pakistani professor, and he's been obsessing about her. And her nephew came to stay with her from France, and something terrible has happened on campus, and he is the one that gets to tell us the story. And so he's narrating the sequence of events, and we slowly get the impression that he might be lying or hiding certain facts.
That's a great description of it. Like, you really do tell the full story without telling the story. And so thank you so much for that, because I would not have been able to do that. Could you tell me the origins of the story, like how this first came to you and how it developed over time? Because, for folks, Sonora and I are friends. And so when you told me about this book, like 2022 or something, you're like, I'm working on this weird book and there's this white man's voice. And I'm like, all right, girl, I support. But like, how? I don't know if we ever talked about this. How did this story come to be? How did it develop and change over time?
Yeah, I love that anytime I would tell you, well, yeah, it's like, from this white male narrator, the light would go out of your eyes and you would just be like, you're like, I'm trying to be supportive here, but whatever, right? And then you start to read it just a couple of months before it hit the stands, and you couldn't stop texting me saying, what the heck? You didn't tell me what it was really about, right? And so it's really about race and Islamophobia and white supremacy and also white radicalization, right, in the United States. So it's about America, it's about Islamophobia in America. and Islamophobia in Europe, and all of that. So those are the themes, even though it's told in the literary thriller genre. Well, it came about because in 2016, I think it was the summer of 2016, there was the story, or really the events of these hijabi women in France who were being asked to take off. Like, so there was this burkini ban, right? So women were not allowed to go swimming in public spaces in France, wearing their entire, the long like bodysuit and the head covering and things like that, because in France, the outward display of your religion is discouraged. So I sort of got really obsessed with that story, and I found myself like reading everything I could about it, because it was so disturbing to me, our obsession with what women are allowed to wear and what's considered appropriate, what's considered not okay. Yeah. So I was wondering, like, why am I so obsessed with this? And usually it's assigned to me like, okay, this is something I should follow. And my background is as a journalist. And so whenever I've started getting obsessed about something like that, I felt like, okay, let me go explore this. And so I applied to go to a writing retreat in France, and I was like, if I get the writing retreat, that means this is a story I'm supposed to tell. And so I got it, and I was like, okay, we're going. And so then I went to Toulouse in France, and I did some interviews with French Muslim families, and I wanted to tell that story, right? So then I started writing it, and I have to think of these characters. And weirdly enough, this character, and I'm in France, right, at this writing retreat, and this character with this white male narration comes to me. And guess why? Because we're in November 2016, and I'm sitting in France writing this, and back home in America, there's this voice of this one white man that you may have heard of, right? We're probably going to hear a lot about this guy in the coming months. That's sort of like out there, and this, like, it's just this chilling but humorous, like he's got a take on everything, and people are listening to that and talking about what he has to say about everything. And it's this sort of white radicalization thing and Islamophobia. He's planning these Muslim bans. And so I wanted to take a voice that's somewhat like that, but not quite like Trump's, right? So that's how, yeah, that's a long answer to how it came about. It's like a few different obsessions in my head.
Yeah, I love that layout. Actually, there are some parts of that story that I didn't know, and the fact that you have these voices and perspectives and views swirling in your head, I think that really connects to this prescient line that comes early in the book, where in the context that it comes up, you're talking about the neighborhoods in Seattle. You and I both live in Seattle. That kind of speaks to that perspective taking, or the voices in your own head, and kind of what ends up on the page. And so the quote or the line in the book is that we lived in this city with a hierarchy of views. And so I would love for you to talk about, like, what are the hierarchy of views within this book? How did this white man's voice take over? Just a little bit more about that, like, perspective.
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking me that, because so I've been living in Seattle for 20 years now, right? Coming from India, and then Louisiana, where I did my PhD, and then so Seattle has been home for a very long time. And I slowly, like, at first I was like, oh, what a beautiful liberal city! Like, this is so great! Like, no racists here, and so just really enjoying it. And then slowly beginning to know it more and more. Sending my kid to school here, seeing some of the stuff in school, and like, really as a South Asian woman coming into America, just slowly getting to know the different forms of racism and sexism and patriarchy and all of these things that exist here, and how they show up, right, in these veiled ways. And Seattle is the perfect city for that kind of veiled thing. Louisiana was different. And so to me, that was like, I don't think enough books and films have been set in Seattle. So, I mean, and it's what I know right now. And so it was really important to write that, because it's kind of like a very self-congratulatory place, right? And so this thing that you're talking about in the book, like the hierarchy of views that he talks about, is sort of playing on like the viewpoints of people, but also literally the views, which he's talking about, like, going to the provost's home on Mercer Island and the sweeping view that they have there of the waterfront home, and then his home on Queen Anne and the kind of Cascade Mountains and things that he is able to see there. And then the view from Ruhaba's home, where the beauty is farther away, right? Like, so it's like a hierarchy, a class kind of thing as well. And a lot of people in Seattle don't think that they are classist or racist. And I so want to just sort of like give out the topography as well as the viewpoints and the sort of like a little bit of the class differences that haven't really been discussed in Seattle, because people just think of it as this pretty city with coffee shops and, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because Seattle is in King County, and it took me a while to realize that the logo for the county is this icon of Martin Luther King Jr. But the original king that King County was named after was like some racist white man. And so even that kind of switch of, okay, we're still King County, we're going to mean a different king, is so indicative of the aspirations of the character of Seattle, but the underpinning is still very much there. Seattle is a super rich character in this book, like down to small details of, there's a cafe here called Portage Bay Cafe, and one of the characters goes to the wrong one because there's a couple of different locations in the city. And when I reread the book, I realized that another theme had emerged for me. There's a conversation of like being in the gray. And the fact that there is this thriller element to it, there's this overcast of some tragic, event that occurs on the campus, but we don't know what it is. It's kind of looming over the events of the book. And so I wonder if you have anything that you want to say more about like Seattle specifically as the ideal space for the themes and the tone of the book.
Yeah, thanks for naming that, because I'd forgotten to mention that too, that yes, it's absolutely the grayness of Seattle. And the grayness, like, so there's a conversation between Ruhaba and Oliver toward the end of the novel where she says, you see the gray, right? She says, I appreciate you because you see the gray. And so really the grayness of Seattle was a big theme in for all these reasons. And the grayness, like the literal grayness that hangs over our shoulders for 9 months, right, is also a thing. Like, we were talking about how there's suddenly sunshine right now in Seattle, and we were like, was I supposed to be ready? Like,
yeah.
for the sun. So, we're so used to the grayness and like the fog, I wanted to use the fog of November to effect in this thing, that there's this fogginess in his narration. There's a fogginess in the shadowy figure that's following him, right? Or he senses there's a shadowy figure coming after him. And the coldness that it happens, like, where his ears shut down to Adil's music. And, so I wanted to use all those themes of being in Seattle and what it feels like, and the grayness in which we live, but we seem to think in black and white, right? Like we think like, all the what they call polarization. I hate that word, but we seem to think like, I'm good and you're evil, like if you think this way, and there's like just nothing in between.
Yeah, no, that's so real. And I feel like really indicative of what happens in university spaces and academic spaces too, where there's like, this is good, this is right, you say this, you don't say this. So if you can speak a little bit too, because the university campus and the sensibility of not just Seattle's landscape and Seattle's like social culture, but the culture of a university campus, why this, for the themes that you're talking about in this book, what made the university such a critical setting for to carry the themes?
Yeah, and as you know, I'm a university professor and an associate dean, right? But I have tenure, and like Oliver, so I feel like I can keep pushing the boundaries of like what is it appropriate to say about your workplace. But it's like really any university campus in the U.S. But yes, there's also Seattle, right? And I think too, because we believe that we live. It's the ivory tower. It's the life of the mind, it's where we explore ideas and really, battle with the with truth and beauty and all those kinds of things. And to me, there's a sense also of being a little bit out of touch. I think I keep guarding against that as well, and I keep thinking like, am I falling into that trap as well? Even while I critique it, like, am I a little bit out of touch? Because there is a way in which we can also academics know so much about this one thing, and they can sort of like hold on to it as an absolute thing, and so but there's so many rivalries. I mean, I've never seen listservs get more animated with like parking, like issues about parking space and office space, rather than any like big idea, right? The big ideas are like, okay, great, like whoever, and then then we get so obsessed with like the little things and the little egos, and just having been a department chair myself, I've seen these things and I've been like, oh, I see. Is this the life of the mind here? Like, what did I sign up for? So,
Yeah.
so all those fragilities are on display on a campus, and then also like taking the trope of the campus novel, which has not mostly been written by white men, and white men in English departments, and taking that and sort of turning it on its head. I feel like it's important that these campus stories now be written by people of color. I would love to get the point of view of a janitorial staff on a campus. Like, oh my God, like the things that they probably know about us.
Hello. Hello.
Exactly. It's like they know exactly what's going on, right, in the trash bins, right? So I think that's really important, and I wanted to play with that and turn that on its head. Like, yeah, the bumbling English professor who's so endearing in the end. I wanted to take that and sort of mess with that a little bit.
Yeah. I think people think of university campuses as these fake places, which sometimes they are, but they're also small cities, right? And I remember when I was got really radicalized in undergrad, I cut my hair. I'm like, listen, I got my Sankofa tattoo. Like I was like, I'm black, you black, 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 And I remember my sister saying to me, like, you're not going to care about all that black stuff when you graduate, like when you step into the quote unquote real world. And so I thought that there was such a tenderness in the book of talking about students who this, issues of diversity and, campus politics is so important to them, at the same time that a lot of those tensions are being mirrored in the quote unquote real world, right? We're leading up to the 2016 presidential election. There are these anti-Muslim policies in France. There's a mention of Sandra Bland and the unlawful traffic stop and her tragic death. There's a small mention of the no youth jail activations that were happening around Seattle. And so could you describe like the research process, or, maybe why these particular political touch points to mirror kind of what's happening in the quote unquote real world, and then the very real things that are happening in this quote unquote fake ivory tower space?
Yeah, so I'm glad you touched on that too, because there's a couple of things, themes that I am obsessed with. So my dissertation was on the WTO protests. So my PhD is in political communication, right? So, and I was looking at social protests and social movements and studying like, how did journalists cover the WTO protests, and comparing that with the Vietnam era protests and stuff. And, so it's like, looking at the communication around that. And so I was definitely following like that and seeing what is the political culture of Seattle, right? And, it was pretty exciting to me. Like, oh my gosh, like they did something incredible in 1999 with the WTO protests. And then looking at that, and he references Oliver Harding, the main character, references those protests and says like, "Oh, that was disgusting," and now these students are also doing a disgusting little protest, and so he harks back to that a little bit. And as I started to write more and more also about race and gender, Sandra Bland's case was just very disturbing to me. So, with Ruhaba being obsessed with that, I mean, I wouldn't say obsession. I think all of us should have been obsessed with that case because it just felt like, wow, it came to nothing, just like it came to nothing. But there's so many layers to that. Like, it's happening with the I'm forgetting the name of the transgender child whose death has just been ruled a suicide. And it's almost like, oh, look at the black and white, right? Like thinking about that as like, oh, you don't see the layers of consequence. You don't see the layers of oppression behind a certain decision that feels like, in certain rulings, we just sort of like making this blanket sort of statement that, oh, this was not, Brian Insignia was the name of that trooper who pulled Sandra Bland over. I know I shouldn't go. You can see that it's still so, it still rankles, right? There was the kind of total racism that you see on display there and the total misogyny that you see on display there. I feel like those are important themes to me as a woman and as a social scientist. And how do I bring that into a novel? I give that as an obsession to the characters. And that's also revealing about Seattle, about America. So it's really a novel, not just about one campus. It's really this theme of Celeste Ng said it well, what do you do when a country doesn't love you back? You love a country that doesn't love you back. And there's this constant sense of, oh my God, I'm so happy about America today. America's voted for Obama and, all those things, right? And then you somehow keep getting the sense like the love is unrequited in some ways. And so, yeah, that's a roundabout way of saying like these themes that I follow in politics, and I'm so deeply political. I wanted to bring those in without them being sort of like in your face or ripped from the headlines, but just giving the characters these obsessions was important for me.
Yeah, no, for sure. So the name of that child was Next Benedict, just to elevate their names in this conversation. I'm just so struck. I was very impacted specifically by the Sandra Bland case because everything that she said to that officer, I would have said, yes, without question. Yeah. Why I got to put my cigarette out in my own car? Like, yep. And I feel like I'm now in this, like in real time, I'm seeing those themes around, well, it's mirrored, I think, in this book with Oliver's obsession over Ruhaba. And it takes a kind of a sexual lusting tone, but it really is underneath it about the violence that happens when white men cannot meet their desires to be loved, revered, admired, and respected.
Yeah. And the fact that they see it as an entitlement. Like, how dare you not? Like it's a surprise to them when they don't get it, right? Like it's just like, wait, this was owed to me.
Yes. There are many times Oliver's like, even when he talks about his sexual, exploits with his students, right? I earned that, right? I earned access to your time, your body, all of that. So Oliver is a truly repulsive, disgusting character. I'm curious, like, but he's the main character and he's so repulsive and I still couldn't stop reading it. I know there are a lot of people who are just like, ugh, hate the narrator, but I love this book. And so I'm curious for you, like, what were some of the exciting parts of inhabiting this like deplorable man's mind?
Yeah, you're talking about the Goodreads reviews, right? And the reviews that are out there about hating the character but still not being able to put the book down. I'm so
Yeah.
grateful to the readers who are like hate the character but can't put it down. I was like, oof, thank goodness. Don't put it down. Like, don't put it down. There's something in it for you, you know.
Yeah.
I think too, like, you know, I can talk about it lightly now, but it was very heavy for me as I was writing it, because I did not want, I didn't want to do any harm, right? Like, I didn't want to have women and people of color, BIPOC people read this and feel re-traumatized, you know. And so I wanted to walk that line between that kind of like triggering and re-traumatizing, you know, and do some of that, right? But also give the reader the sense that don't worry, like, you know, we're still on your side. Like, we're making fun of this guy, right? And so I think that to me was the challenge, and relieved to see that people have seen that come through, that the satire in the book is sort of poking fun, even though everything is being said um, by Oliver. That we are getting the sense like, oh my god, do you even know what you're saying, you fool? Like, you
Hmm.
know, do you see like how you are being racist? And the fact that he doesn't see it is the humor, right? Like, there's so much where it's like, I'm not laughing with you, you idiot. I'm laughing with, you know, I'm laughing at you, and you don't even know how we're all laughing at you, you know. So that was why the title, there are multiple reasons for the name, the laughter for the book, but
Yeah.
that was one of the things too, like, you know, whose laughter is it and who is it aimed at? And I think one of the reasons I was doing that too was really this sort of Trumpian character who is funny in a way, right? Like, some of his tweets and stuff, you read it and you're laughing your head off, but you're not laughing with him. You're laughing at him. You're laughing at the ridiculousness of his grandiosity, at his sense of entitlement, at his like buffoonery, and as his like, you know, and you're laughing with a little bit of anger, and you're like, then you're
Hmm.
mad at yourself for laughing, and you're like, what was I laughing at, you know? But the gut response is laughter. And so I think I wanted to bring that same sense of discomfort with laughter, but also this rage, or laughter as an outlet of rage as well, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. No, I felt that like when I was trying to describe, like there is a humorous element to the book, but I think the way that you balanced it, it almost comes across as like a little sinister, you know, like even with Trump, like, yeah, this is funny, but this man was still president, right? It's kind of like the Joker from Batman. Like, yeah, it's a cartoon villain and you're kind of laughing at how absurd and ridiculous everything is, but the stakes are super high with the capacity of, you know, what their laughter means for our lives, like our ability to laugh at them, that, you know, that has consequences too, right?
Yeah.
I've heard your book described, and I think you told me this, or maybe it was at your book launch, where your book has been described as not for the white gaze, it is about the white gaze. And that is such a critical distinction of this book, right? You know, Oliver, to your point, is being radicalized in this, you know, pre-Trump era. The white rage is just seething through the pages, but there are all these subtle nuances, right? And so one thing that I picked up on, and you'd mentioned it with his inability to hear Adil, the child character, Ruhaba's nephew, is a flautist, right? And he literally cannot hear the music, right? Another example, there's a black trans character that he like cannot remember her name. Like for most of the book, it's like, I think it's this, maybe it's this. And there's this sense that like he just cannot allow for the full humanity of people of color and all of our intersecting identities. And so I'm curious about like what nuances of the white gaze you been exploring with this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the things that you mentioned, you know, were things that I wanted to expose, as like I have slowly come to the realization, or, you know, and of course people that have been historically marginalized and minoritized and oppressed in the US are very familiar with these things, right? And for me, it's been gradual, and that's why the character is South Asian. She's Pakistani, so she's not Indian like me, but she also is new, right? So these are like newer immigrants facing older racism, right? Um, and I think too, yeah, that it's such a sad thing that in the entitlement, like you would get it, like, and that's kind of like in the end too, he thinks about that, you know this was within my like some kind of this love was within my grasp, right? Like, I'm not entitled to these things, but these are the only ways he's been expected to see his acquisition. Like, it should be sexual, it should be this, and it should be that, right? Whereas there's a different kind, there's a multi-layered intersectional kind of love that he's welcome to have, right? And a friendship he's open to, like I would walk in and I'd say, yeah, I'm not saying I don't want to be friends with white people, like, come on. And then slowly realizing, like, oh wait, you were in it for this, or you were in it for feeling better about yourself, or want my son in your photographs with your white kids, right? So that they look a certain way. And that's just been so crushing and heartbreaking. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to kind of like develop that idea a little bit too. That, of course, there's wonderful white people. We have to always say that, right? Like, but I mean,
Hashtag not all whites.
right, not all whites, and definitely not the ones who are reading my book. Please read our books, right? But you're going to feel uncomfortable, and that's something that I've been happy to see as well, where a lot of white readers have said, like, yeah, this book made me super uncomfortable because I feel like I have thought like him a few times, and or my husband or my uncle or my brother, or someone I know thinks like this and talks like this, and some people have been truly honest to say that, yes, I think my gaze, I've had to correct my gaze as well on this. So I think I definitely wanted to push in that direction to show that, for instance, like you mentioned, right? Like Adil's music, like, what a loss, twice Oliver gets the opportunity to listen to Adil's music, but he literally cannot hear it. And I wanted to show that. So thank you for picking up on that, the fact that he can't hear it, you can't see the beauty,
Yeah.
you're so obsessed with your fear of this radicalized Muslim youth, or your fear of some other kind, or your perceptions, that you just miss it.
Yeah. I read this paper recently for my own book, and the title is very provocative. I cannot recall the authors of this, but the title was They Want the Spanish but Not the Mexicans. And it was exploring white families who put their white children in Spanish immersion schools and just like the challenges of, oh, legit, I'm here for the Spanish. Like, I don't want to actually deal with the teachers and the other students or any of that. And so a concept that came out of that paper, they termed it consumptive contact. And so their contacts with, marginalized people is just for their own consumption, like their own aims. And they think for Oliver, his type of contact that he wants is a conquering perspective, but he literally has no other sense of what it means to be in community with people. He just like, oh, I get to be close to you if I can conquer you, if I can get you in my bed, if I can like lay you down over my desk. Also, for folks who haven't read it, the book is a little sexy in like gross ways, but there's a little sexy time in the book. So I want to talk about Ruhaba. Ruhaba is undeniably the more dynamic, complex, intriguing, subversive character in the book. I don't think Ruhaba and I would be friends in real life. I would respect the hell out of her, but I don't think we would be cool like that, And so talk to me about how you developed Ruhaba and that strategic tensions where readers want to know more about her but can't.
Yeah, yeah. So in my first draft of the book, oh, my first draft was so bleak, but because keep in mind, I was writing it from November 2016 to around July 2017. Everything was bleak back then, right? So it was really bleak. And in that one, we don't get to hear from Ruhaba at all. That was my first draft, right? And so then in conversations with beta readers and with my agent, it was like, okay, I definitely want to show the silencing and erasure of this character in this white man's gaze, but also in order to layer it with doubt, right, of his gaze. There's going to be like these really short emails and short bursts of some kind, and a little bit of a longer thing at the end that it kind of like gives us a fuller idea of who Ruhaba is. And it was really important for me, especially because I'm a Hindu Indian woman writing a Pakistani Muslim woman character, right? So for me, it was really important not to give her a complete voice in the book, because that to me would feel like cultural appropriation and something like, okay, that's not my story to be told. But writing from his point of view, I mean, his voice, appropriating his voice is definitely not cultural appropriation for me. Didn't have like a moment of like regret or thought about that. Right?
Yes.
So,
Also, the reason why we know so much about y'all, like, come on.
yeah, exactly. We've been listening to you and reading you and like sitting with you in meetings and, all the time, right? Your voice,
Yes.
that voice comes very easily to me, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, like, just have to close my eyes and imagine it, and there it is, right? So, but appropriating Ruhaba's voice would have been very problematic to me. So I didn't want to write directly in her voice or express directly her point of view, but more through like little found pieces of email and his idea of what she said and what. So that was one thing I wanted to tread. And I also didn't want to make a flattened sort of Muslim woman character who is, doing all the right things, the poor thing. She's beautiful and she's, sacrificing and just like this activist. I wanted to make her really complicated and say, like, yeah, she wears a hijab, but she's not like to be rescued. Okay. She's like rescuing other people. She's working for you, America, like rescuing the right people in America, and also has got a whole other shit going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to do that as well, and cast her as, for the reader, as, without giving any spoilers, but with a sense of, that thing that we have, that a lot of people have, like a reverence for a woman of color, like, being exceptional and being like successful and all of that, and then sort of complicate that.
Yeah, like she is the moral high ground, the savior of, the all, and you're just like, a little gray, Ruhaba. Okay, you a little gray too, girl.
Exactly.
So the pets of threat phenomenon shows up in this book. Ruhaba says pet and threat, and I'm like, ooh, ding, ding, ding. Heard that. Shout out to Dr. Keisha Thomas, a friend of mine. She's the one who coined the pet to threat phenomenon. And so, for folks who aren't familiar, pet to threat explains what happens to Black women and other women of color in professional settings where they are initially seen as likable and non-threatening, in need of help, right? AKA treated as pets. But then once they start to exert assertiveness or their expertise or their ambition, then they become viewed as threats to the status quo of the institution. What was interesting, though, on my second read, I realized that Ruhaba kind of inverts this, right? She is asking why she has to be a pet. Why can't she be seen as a threat, right? She wants to own that kind of threat positioning. And I just thought that it was so powerful and so subversive. So can you share a little bit more about Ruhaba's specific spin on this pet threat dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, that's been my experience, right? So I wanted to imbue her experience with that too. It was that, like, you are uh she's kind of a hijabi Pakistani woman in Seattle, and people want to be supportive and say like, oh my gosh, you totally belong here. We want to help you make it here, right? And so we'll put you on this committee. We really want your voice on this committee, right? This is how, when any committee work that I've been approached for, it's like, we would really love your voice on this committee. And it's like, yeah, it also is a lot of time for me, okay?
Yes.
And it's like a lot of burnout, because I mean, I'm definitely going to have problems on this committee, right? So I think there's that, like, there's the sense of like, we're doing this for you. And then you get to a certain point where you might be in a position of power, right? Or you might be in a position where now you're a tenured person, or you've got this, like, but you're not allowed to, you're always supposed to look as if you should feel grateful to be here among us, right?
Hello.
Yeah. Be
Yeah.
grateful to be here. You can laugh a little bit. Don't laugh too loud, right? And look like you are suffering a little bit. This was something
Yeah.
that was told to me by
That's
another.
so real.
Yeah. By, like, I was told by a Latina professor, like, when I was on tenure track, and I was hanging out, and someone said, "Oh, what do you do over the summer?" And I said, "Oh my God, I had so much fun. I did this, I did that." And she said, "No, when someone asks you that, you're supposed to talk about all the work you did over the summer and all the papers you wrote and everything." And I was like, "Yeah, I did that, but that's so boring to talk about. Like, why?" And so so there's all this thing of like, you can't look like you're having fun. You cannot. You got to look like you're a little bit, and so it's kind of like, okay, you're constantly measuring how you should appear, that so that you don't appear as a threat. And then if you suddenly speak up at a meeting and you address the white man in the meeting and say, "You're full of shit," it's just
Yeah.
like, it's like, no, you don't do that, because hasn't he been helpful all these years? Like, aren't you supposed to be grateful? And so I did want to get to that thing too, and I wanted to look at white feminism in that as well, and white women mentors as well, where the department chair toward the end of the book says, "Hey, go make nice with him, because you're on tenure track. You got to be careful here." So, and she goes, to make nice with him, and so yeah, did I get a bit too animated there? Like, who was speaking for me?
No, that's perfect, because I think this leads perfectly into my next line of questioning. So, and this is not a spoiler. Again, I feel like I've been so good
You've
about
been so
not talking
good.
about,
So good. I
because
feel like I'm doing all the spoil. I'm doing the spoilers, not you.
no, you're not, because you know what I want to talk about, but we can't talk about that. But in the end, Ruhaba, who again we only hear from her directly, quote unquote, directly through emails, bits of emails, drafts of emails that she sent. But one of the last emails that we read from her, it begins with, "Come bear witness to my silence."
Mhm.
And so I feel like as people of color and our intersecting marginalities, we're constantly having to contend with this chronic state of being hypervisible and being invisible at the same time. And
Mhm.
so I've now, because I'm writing my own book, so I'm like, I've been reading all types of crazy, all types of stuff. And so, I've been starting to think about this, that tension through this lens that I learned from a Guggenheim curator, Ashley James, who curated this phenomenal exhibit that is now still at the Guggenheim right now, called Going Dark. And in her essay around the piece, she talks about an imposed invisibility and a desired invisibility, like from folks of color. And so, what are ways that there's this imposed visibility and invisibility? And for us, the ways that we desire visibility and can also desire invisibility. And so I feel like Ruhaba, and by extension, like women of color in the workplace, are constantly negotiating the ways that we desire being visible in some ways, and can take advantage of these, accoutrements of identity to be visible as a political designation. But we also desire invisibility, right? And wanting to conceal, I wouldn't say code switching, but like they're just parts of who we are that are just not going to be available for the space, right?
Mhm.
And we're also still negotiating at the same time the ways that invisibility and visibility are imposed on us. And Ruhaba is like constantly negotiating this in her life. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say with like this specific image making that Ruhaba does in her professional spaces that could be a learning or maybe a salve for the people who are navigating this in the real world.
That's so wonderful. Like, so it might be a good time to show the cover of the book, which is really expressive of, like, what do who's seeing and who's being visible and who is being looked at, right? And the blurring of that a little bit, right? And the double consciousness, right? The double consciousness as well. That there's this consciousness, and that's the Indian cover, and there's this, I don't know how to do this, but yeah, there's this woman's consciousness, and then there's this woman's consciousness there as well. And I think the way Ruhaba is doing it is something that we all experience, right? That she is like really interested in the student struggle. She wants to be part of that, and she wants to not be front and center. She wants to be supportive of that. But it all becomes, from his point of view, it becomes about her being supportive of that, right? And so she's like radicalized in all these different ways, and so she's seen in all these different ways. Why can't she be just like any other white male professor, maybe doing the leftist thing and helping the students with their protests, right? But her doing it means so many things at so many different levels for different people in the room that are talking about how she's getting involved with the student protests, right? So little things like that, and the friendship that she's building, or the support and the mentoring that she's doing for the Black student, and whose name is Essence, and he doesn't get it right, but but she's working with that student, and it's just like, the invisibility of that student in the context, like Oliver does not see that student because he's so obsessed with Ruhaba. So there's all these different moments in the book where she is, like you said, navigating that, right? Does she get to have a little complication at home with the arrival of her nephew? Even that is appropriated for some kind of like use to to this man, right? So I think that was something, and her desire to not really be at this, the Halloween party, and then she arrives dressed up as Johnny
Jack
Depp,
Sparrow.
Jack Sparrow, which is an unsexualized thing. Like, can she do that? Like, take up this white man's garb, right? And be shift in a gender thing and not do a gender specific Halloween costume. So there's all of those moments where I wanted to take that and see, like, she's being subversive in all these different ways, and like just the shifting, like, shifting expectations and constantly doing that. And she may be doing it just for her own sake, right? But everything is imbued with meaning, which makes her hyper visible.
Yeah, there was that moment in the supermarket where she has an interaction with the child, and people are crowding around her to take photos of it. And it's just like,
yeah,
I'm in the supermarket talking to your punk kid. Like, why is this a photo op,
And you're talking to the punk kid because the punk kid points at her and says, look, a Muslim, like, and she's like, yeah, that's fine that they're saying that. It's like, yeah, I am a Muslim. You don't have to hush the child as if they said some slur or something. I am a Muslim woman, so it's fine, right? Like, and so I think that too, but the warm, people getting the warm and fuzzies and taking pictures of it and everything is just like, can I just be, can I have a human interaction without becoming your little project,
Yeah. I will say that moment reminded me, I'd gone to Manila a couple of times, and my first time there, this little boy was like hiding behind his mom and just kept looking at me. Like, as a Black woman with hair like this, you're just very visible in the Philippines, And so this little boy's just looking at me, and he's like, Americano. And I was like, oh, yes, I am American. Also, there are a lot of children that would not be the word that they would say, which is truly a reflection of like what is happening in your household. And so I think that moment too with that kid in the supermarket was just like, it's not about the child, it's really about the adults that are around that child.
Right.
Speaking of children, I do want to talk a bit about Adil. Can you tell us a bit about him and how his character is in conversation with your previous book, How to Raise a Feminist Son?
Yeah. um, he is my son and I were talking about this, right? My feminist son and I, like, when I said, oh, isn't Adil just such a lovely and wonderful, such a good character? And he said, well, the thing is that Adil is a normal character, right? He's normal. Like everything that he feels and says should be normal, but that's not normalized. And so we see like, oh my gosh, we imbue him with something that's like extra special. Whereas he just wants to, like, he's just a kid who wants to go back home and ask this girl out to the movies, right? That's all he wants. But as he's getting to this age, he's becoming a teenager, he's again being seen as a threat. He goes from being the cute boy, and of course, a lot of black kids, that's what happens to them, as like growing up in this country. And so, how is he seen in France? How is he seen now in the US, right? And looking also, I think there's something particular about that age of 14 and 15, like in raising a son. I've seen that that's when you start getting conscripted into what kind of masculinity you are to be, right? Which one. And so it's very important at that stage what men are around you and what kind of masculinity is around you, right? And so Oliver Harding thinks of himself as a good, sweet, kind man, and but also someone who's like, okay, you're going to know about guns, not because you're going to use them, but you're going to know the mind of the shooter, right? And I think it was really like that line. I hope it hit home for people where he said, but I don't want to know his mind. I don't want to know the mind of the shooter, right? Like, he's just like, I don't want to know this. Like, why do I have to know it, right? And I think that's the thing for me, that tenderness at that age and the kindness and he just wants to be simple. He doesn't want to get into this thing. But he's being told like what kind of man you should be. In France as well, he's being seen as a radicalized youth, or and also he feels the burden, or he feels the pressure to be sort of the protector of his mother. When he sees the policeman approaching her and asking her to take off her hijab, he feels like he needs to step up. So he's at that age where there are all these pulls on him. And so, I'd written the first draft of The Laughter before I started to really write the whole of How to Raise a Feminist Son. So in a way, the two books are actually in conversation with each other, because everything that I was reading and researching while writing How to Raise a Feminist Son and recollecting from my own experiences were also informing the characters of both Adil and Oliver, right? So, how not to be a man, how to be a man, at what age we start to see that kind of masculinity being negotiated and navigated.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would recommend How to Raise a Feminist Son for everyone. I personally would retitle it to How to Raise a Feminist Nephew, because I don't have kids. But, my nephew is kind of navigating this right now. He's 13, 14. And I remember hanging out with them a couple of months ago, and we were just riding bikes in his neighborhood. They live in Florida. And he's just kind of going off and doing this thing, and he's doing his turns, and he started turning around and looping back, because I had to, carry the rear with the young kids. So he's going forward and looping back, going forward and looping back. And to loop around, he's turning in people's yards, in their driveways. And I was like, please do not do that. Do not do that. You cannot go onto someone's property. And he's like, I do not understand why this is such a big deal. And this was around the time of the Ralph Yarl shooting, the young teen who got shot because he, knocked on the wrong guy's door. And, I was trying to be very sensitive about how to express it. And my sister was like, because you will get shot. Someone will shoot you. And he was just so taken aback by that. And he goes, why are there so many guns in this country? Like, why would somebody shoot me for that? And it just like, I don't know what to say. And he needs me to say something. And I felt that, again, Adil is a very normal child who's navigating this like cusp of manhood in a place that he's really unfamiliar with, that is, even though Oliver at one point says everyone is safe in America, I mean, maybe if you're Oliver, but for everyone else, like, this is not a super safe space.
Yeah.
So,
sorry.
go ahead.
I'm sorry about that experience. Like, yeah, and it's so expected, right? Like, I had to learn like how people were looking at my son in America, and then also like, think of all the complexities of that, and of course not realize, okay, so and he said like, I'm not as much a threat in this country as my black friend, right? Like, and young men and women and kids, right? And just kind of like imagine all, it's just so, yeah, it's like a knot, because it's like, why do I have to have this, have this conversation? Why do I have to constantly, it's just constantly going to have to be aware of that, right? In different spaces, like you cannot just walk into a space. Of course Oliver thinks everyone is safe here, right?
Yeah.
That's his experience.
Yeah. There's at one point in the book where the students are advocating for like critical whiteness studies, which I just kind of tickled me because I'm like, this actual book would need to be in the curriculum of a critical whiteness studies class. And so I just love that meta-ness of that. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. You heard it here first, everyone. Line up and sign up.
Exactly. So like most writers, you work full time. And so I'm curious if you have any advice for folks who want to write something long form but are working full time.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Like, I've become very precious about this now, right? Like, so I'm just headed out on for a writing residency, at a writing retreat, and I am like, oh yeah, this is, I need these conditions in order to write. Okay, and then I have to remind myself that my first novel, Foreign, that is actually in a year or so, is going to be published here in the US now. It was only published by Penguin Random House India. So that one I wrote, I was a single mom. I was on tenure track, untenured, right? And dealing with so many things of going through surgeries and stuff. But twice a week for 2 hours, I would sit down with a friend in a coffee shop and like write it, right? And then come home and like basically put some frozen pizza in the oven for my kid, right? But so it can be done. Now, this is all for myself, like with the privilege of like a home and being able to and a university job and a salary and everything like that. So I don't know the different positionalities and restraints that other people have, but I think for me, what I would tell myself now as I become more and more precious about the ideal conditions is that you have to prioritize it, right? Like you have to, like, how badly do you want to tell the story? Like, can you contain it within you for the best conditions, or do you prioritize it and say, I'm just going to wake up a half hour earlier or do something or
Mm,
something, no to that thing, and cut some people out of your life, right? Like the people that are draining your time,
that's
or
part of
just
it too.
yeah. And I think definitely for women of color, I would say learn to say no, especially to things that work. Just say no for a lot of things. Okay, they want us now, they want our voices on this, right? So so just like pick and choose the things that you want to do and see where you can say no, um and try and make this happen, because it's like it's a really beautiful thing to nurture your craft and also find some rest and see the joy in it, and also recognize, I would say often like, oh, I wish I could live the writer's life. This is the writer's life, right? Like the stolen
Hmm.
moments and the chaos of it is all the writer's life. So just remember, there's no ideal conditions.
That's fact. I think Jamie Attenberg, in her 1000 Days of Summer writing challenges, at one point, I think she said, you have to leverage your resources for your art. And once I read that, that really changed it for me. Like when you say resources, that means time, money, relationships. Like, okay, I didn't go for a snowboarding trip, for holiday, but I'm going to make a writing retreat instead for my vacation, right? Like, And so how can you leverage your resources, whatever that is, for your art? And so I feel like I'm hearing that very strongly from you in having throughout your writing career. This one's a little bit more spicy. So
Okay.
as you said, like, you're a professor, associate dean at a university in Seattle. This book happens at a university in Seattle. What advice do you have for writers who want to borrow the setting or different aspects of their work lives into their art?
Oh, that's terrific. I mean, at the end of the day, it's fiction, right? So you just say, like, I'm fictionalizing something, and that these are all characters, and change every character. Like, if write amalgamations of characters, so that, I mean, my dream was that every white man on campus is reading it and saying, "Is this me?"
Is this
But
me?
not sure, right? Or is like, "Yeah, this is not me. It's that guy," right? Either way, I'm fine with that, right? Um, I mean, I joke. I have such wonderful colleagues, and great institution, right? So, but yeah, I think again, I could not have written this on tenure track. I'm not saying that there's punitive measures or anything, but I would be uncomfortable doing that, right? I think making use of the fact that I have tenure and I'm like a full professor and all, that's a privilege from point that I can write from. I think it's becoming more and more common, even for nonfiction books, to be written. Like, there's a book about Amazon, and so I think just straddling that spot, there's a sweet spot where you can use the workplace, but also couch it in fiction, couch it in, like, make all the right changes so that people don't sue you. And then also, yeah, you'll always run the risk of, like, your colleagues and your coworkers being mad at you, but I've done that with family, and it's like,
As the people say, a hit dog hollers. Okay, I didn't say your name, I didn't say anything, but you out here hollering.
exactly.
That's on you. We have 1 minute left. I have 2 questions, so let's do a speed round on this question, and then what I want to ask you last.
Okay.
But I know this book is set in 2016. This still feels like this book could be happening right now with, like, all this anti-woke politics. Donald Trump is still a candidate for president this time around too. I'm just wondering, like, for folks, what do you see is still so urgent about this novel for our current moment?
The fact that these men keep popping up, like they're like a whack-a-mole thing. Like, come on, look at the 2 guys who are going to be running for president. I mean, look at this. What are we even doing? This is supposed to be America. I mean, I don't know. So yeah, it's like the bad dream happening over and over again. And it's like, really? Come on, America. Could
Mhm.
you not, like, have some, amazing people? What's happening? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just that it's the same thing, and it's the same kind of things are going to happen all over again. His voice is going to be in our heads. It's come back. So
Yeah.
yeah, it becomes more and more relevant. You'd think that it would be gone, and yeah.
And so I strongly encourage folks to get ready, get this book. It will be published in paperback in a few months.
Yes,
You can go,
yeah,
May 20, what?
May 28th.
May 28th, we'll get a paperback version. You can get the book now at oneKIN, shoponekin.co. We'll also be able to see the book in another iteration, hopefully soon. It has been optioned for a film.
Yes. Yes.
And so for our final question, the book is incredibly cinematic, so I'm not surprised that it has been optioned for a film. And you and we have been playing this game since it's been published. Since before it was published, we have been fantasy casting. I cannot tell you how many screenshots of white men I have sent you to figure out who needs to play Oliver. And so I want you to fantasy cast Oliver and Ruhaba.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah, I've liked all your suggestions, and I was like, oh my God, yes, you're right. So we can talk about that. But I think I see more and more like Adam Driver, like made a little bit older. And I saw a picture of his from his new film Ferrari. And I was like, oh my God, that could be Oliver, you know. So I'm thinking more and more him. I would also love Matthew McFadden from Succession, who plays
Mm-hmm.
Tom Wambsgans. I think he would be excellent as well. So those are my two fantasies. And also there's for Ruhaba, I haven't been able to narrow it down. There are some Pakistani actresses that I absolutely love. There are some Bollywood actresses that I absolutely love. But yeah, the writer director who's working on it, we had a conversation, and we keep doing this as well, and it's really fun. What
Yeah.
about you? Who do you think?
Bryan Cranston for Oliver
Yes.
or Steve Carell, I think,
Ooh,
could give a fantastic performance of
yeah.
that, like, oh, kind of looking friendly, but a little bit weird. Like, why are you stalking me right now? You know?
Right. Right.
And I strongly for Ruhaba. This was my first pick, and this is my only pick. Is Mira Sethi,
Yeah.
who is an author that we have featured here at Lit Lounge in our first season, who wrote the short story collection Are You Enjoying? She's also a phenomenal Pakistani actress, and she just like gives Ruhaba to me. I've sent you so many images of her.
Yeah.
So
She's
please tell your people, have your people call her people.
incredible. I wish you and I were just making this film right now. We would be like, come on, everyone.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Sonora. I love you so much as a friend, as a literary citizen, as someone who admires so much. Thank you for spending your time with us at the Lit Lounge. Thank you again to everyone who showed up and, like, you know, put your comments in. Please get this book. I don't have a great beautiful cover because Sonora gifted me a beautiful early copy of this, but the covers that Sonora had shared are just gorgeous. So I strongly encourage you to get the book, mark it up, do what you got to do, have fun with it. Thank y'all so much.
Jodi-Ann, thank you so much. Your reading of the book and your conversations have been so incredible and valuable to me. I love you right back and cannot wait for your book to be out in the world.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.